Good morning. It is Wednesday, September 16th, 2020. You can now relax and be informed. Here is your daily bite of news. Pfizer Inc. said on Tuesday that participants in their coronavirus vaccine study were showing mostly mild to moderate side effects. Side effects observed include fatigue, headache, chills, and muscle pain. Some participants in the trial also developed high fevers. The data is blinded, meaning Pfizer doesn't know who received the vaccine and who received the placebo. The company has enrolled 44,000 volunteers to trial test the experimental COVID-19 drug, partnering with German BioNTech. The experiments are in an ongoing late-stage study. Pfizer hopes for affirmative results in October and that the vaccine looks to have 60% success rate. On Monday, nurse Dawn Wooten came out exposing a U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE facility in Georgia for dangerous medical malpractices. She lodged a complaint with the Inspector General of Homeland Security that medical staff on the facility were ignoring detainee requests for COVID-19 tests and were performing unwarranted hysterectomy procedures, often on women who were unaware of why they were having the procedure, and in some cases for only complaining about heavy menstrual cycles. Nurse Dawn Wooten, who worked at the Irwin County Detention Center, ICDC, says they use a specific out-of-facility doctor who has had a history of faulty practices. After Nurse Wooten complained about the abuses and filed publicly, she was reprimanded and demoted by the ICDC. European Union leaders told Chinese President Xi Jinping on Monday in a video summit and conference statement that Europe would no longer be taken advantage of in trade. German Chancellor Angela Merkel and Council President Charles Michel said Europe is a player, not a playing field, and said China needed to open up markets, respect minorities, and step down from the crackdown in Hong Kong. Europe has hardened to China after the pandemic outbreak and is anxious to show that they will not take sides in the U.S. and China global trade standoff. The EU is currently China's top trading partner, and the demand for a level playing field with rules is said to be justified after China's last 15-year economic transformation. Merkel said cooperation with China must be based on certain principles: reciprocity, fair competition. We are different social systems, but while we are committed to multilateralism, it must be rule-based. The U.S. Space Force confirmed its space-based infrared system satellites were used to detect more than a dozen Iranian missiles aimed at U.S. fighters and a U.S. airbase in Iraq in January. Built by Lockheed Martin, the SBIRS used 4 satellites with 2 payload host satellites to orbit for global coverage. A 5th geosynchronous satellite is expected to launch in 2021. Yoshihide Suga has been elected Japan's new prime minister this day, Wednesday. Growing up a former cardboard factory worker and farmer's son, he is now leader of the world's third largest economy. 71 years old, head of the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, he was elected with 70% of the vote and was backed by the Diet, with a majority in the chambers. He is to be sworn into office by Emperor Naruhito at the Imperial Palace in Tokyo this afternoon, Wednesday. Louisville, Kentucky has settled a $12 million settlement to victim Breonna Taylor's family as part of financial repercussion for police misconduct in her death that happened 6 months ago. As part of the settlement, the city agreed to establish a housing credit program for officers to live in the community they serve, programs that will use social workers to provide support for police runs, and require commanders to review and approve warrants before seeking judicial approval. The European Union's Green Deal, struck in July, has a $895 billion coronavirus relief package, 1/3 of which will be devoted to decarbonization and promoting green technologies. It was announced in March that they plan to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions for the bloc group by 2050. It will necessitate a total overhaul of the European economy, and the finalizing of the law toward this could take about 2 years to go into effect, when the 27 EU countries will then hash out specific priorities and commitments for the policy plan. Today, Wednesday, the European Commission plans to propose an ambitious interim target for the bloc's 2030 greenhouse emissions bill, likely at a 55% reduction of 1990's emission levels. Coming up in October, the Council of the EU will vote and discuss the Green Deal goals. They hope to have the climate neutrality law legislative work done by the end of 2020. Jon Stewart joined New York Senators Kirsten Gillibrand, Representative of California Raul Ruiz, former VA Secretary David Shulkin, and veteran advocate John Feal at a news conference on Tuesday to support presumptive benefits of war fighters exposed to burn pits and other toxins Act of 2020 for the House to vote on. The bill would financially support veterans who were exposed to harmful fumes and toxins for years while working and serving at military sites in Iraq and Afghanistan near burn pits full of waste and hazardous materials. Veterans from these sites are now experiencing injuries and illnesses that stem from that prolonged exposure, but are not being compensated for treatment under military health coverage because of the source being not recognized as having evidence to support the diagnosis. The Abraham Accords Peace Agreement, Treaty of Peace, Diplomatic Relations, and Full Normalization between the United Arab Emirates and the State of Israel was signed Tuesday, September 15, 2020. Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, UAE Foreign Minister Abdullah bin Zayed, and Bahrain Foreign Minister Abdulatif al-Zayani met with President Donald Trump at the White House to sign the Accord Agreement to exchange embassies and ambassadors and to cooperate together in healthcare, security, trade, and tourism sectors, as well as open doors for Muslims and other countries to visit mosques and holy sites in Jerusalem. President Trump started off by thanking everyone involved for their efforts in making the agreements come about and thanked the world leaders for their cooperation. After him, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who also thanked the leadership involved and mentioned his experience as a soldier confronting death in the price of war, and that this deal represents a peace between peoples, not a peace between leaders. He pointed out that this deal comes during an auspicious week for the Jewish people of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. After him, Minister bin Zayed spoke about extending a hand of peace and thanked the State of Israel for halting the annexation of further Palestinian territories, and that the UAE is ready to work towards stability and sustainable development for humanitarianism. He talked about the UAE's recent launch for a probe to Mars and a space nuclear power plant. Then, Prime Minister al-Zayani spoke on behalf of his King Hamad al-Khalifa, appreciating the leader's steps towards genuine engagement towards a two-state solution to Palestine-Israeli conflict, and bid that international partner states not waste time in seizing on this opportunity. After their speeches, each party signed documents that were in English, Hebrew, and Arabic at 1:37 p.m. Here is how some would explain the unfolding of events that led to the accord signing. Peace talks between the U.S., Israel, and the UAE are considered to have first been made possible with the moving of the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem, forming a trust with Israel. Some also attribute pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal to have drawn allies in the region closer to the U.S. talks as well. It is thought that the authorized killing of General Soleimani sent a message of resolve and commitment. Jared Kushner, Trump's son, worked with a core team of strategists such as Avi Berkowitz, Iran envoy Brian Hook, and National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. Kushner's team spent the first year with a modest approach of just going to countries' leaders and asking for their input. Then the administration held a conference in Bahrain for a $50 billion economic plan for the Palestinian territories, to which the Palestinians didn't choose to attend, rejecting Trump's administration's two-state solution. The common concern about checking Iran's power drew Israel and Arab states together in Warsaw for a dinner early last year, where Arab ministers and Netanyahu met to discuss options. Netanyahu agreed to annex Jewish settlements on the West Bank, which the UAE quickly annexed, but both parties were able to save face. Israel and the UAE quickly set up a shared banking system. The hope is that if Palestine and Iran see that regions are moving forward without them and that their influence and leadership in the area has been reduced, that it could lead to political change and new cooperation with the U.S. in Palestine. Trump's administration, through Kushner and his team, has made it clear it wants to invest in the economic security of Palestine if they are willing to come to the table in the future. That concludes our news for the day. If you would like to read more on any of these topics, please see the sources in the description. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to this channel to receive a daily news update. Be relaxed, be informed, be connected.